All right, we're live. All right, Pastor Megan is going to open our meeting with prayer. All right.
Wonderful. Let us pray. Well, first of all, let me welcome you. So excited that y'all have come and joined us tonight. So welcome to this series, Wednesday Night Live on social justice at First Presbyterian Church in beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. Most of you know who I am, but for those of you who don't, I am Megan McMillan, and it's my joy to serve as the associate pastor of this congregation, where our mission statement is to be and make disciples of Jesus Christ, who know the Lord and who through love serve God and others. And one way that we love God and others is through our minds. And here at First Presbyterian Church, that's through Christian education. As our minds are fed, our hearts become inspired to action in our community and in the larger world as we live out our faith. It's such a joy to be back for this third segment in our 12-week series of our social justice series. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so grateful for the leadership of the CE moderator, Cal Brinkman, who has organized this series, and Unita Brewer to the chair of the Social Justice Subcommittee, and the collaboration of the Faith Journey and Contemporary Faith Sunday School classes. And certainly we're grateful for Jim Nixon for taking the time to be here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Before we get started, let's go to God in prayer. Spirit of the living God, we have heard your call to share in building up the kingdom of God. Fill us with the desire to change ourselves and to change the world. Inflame our passion for justice into a commitment to address unjust situations and structures. Deepen our concern for our siblings in this community, this country, and the world who endure the burden of poverty, war, exploitation, and persecution. Let us enthusiastically play our part in the mission of the church in the world. Banish any complacency in our hearts and minds. Teach us to recognize the lack of justice, and may we always act in the spirit of justice. May we envision, pray about, and create a different sort of world in which injustice is replaced with a renewed sense of solidarity and care. Enlivened by the Spirit, may we have the eyes to see and the ears to hear what it is you are calling us to this night. In the holy name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Okay. So y'all should be seeing my screen at this point. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So tonight, this is the agenda. We just had our opening prayer. Going to take a minute to go over the rules of Zoom meetings and a little bit about the operation. Introduce our speaker for this evening, then turn over the floor. At the end of the talk, we'll have some questions and answers and a closing prayer. Okay, things to know. This is being recorded so that the noises that come across when your dogs bark, we'll hear that too. So if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. People who don't mute their microphone, you can give us some extraneous noises and feedback that ruins the presentation for everyone. Raising your hand during the Q&A. That is done through a function on Zoom. You can also use the chat features to submit questions so that they can be answered in order. During the talk, it's helpful to change to the speaker view. The speaker view takes the screenshot of the person who's talking and makes them the largest square on your screen. All right, so if you're looking at this, you see that the mute button will be found in the lower left of your screen in your Zoom window. The speaker view is found in the upper right, where you can change your views. The emotions and chats are at the bottom of the screen. And on the low reactions, you can see one for raising hands, and that way we'll know that you've got something question to ask. All right, tonight we have Mr. Jim Nixon. Jim is the LGBTQ liaison to the mayor's office and also runs the Metro LGBTQ Welcome Center. And if you didn't hear earlier, he's also a proud dog owner. Now, tonight's topic in social justice is about issues facing the LGBT community. Now, I'd just like to point out a little bit of the history of the PCUSA in this regard. The PCUSA first started talking about ordination of homosexuals in 1970s, around 78. The issue came up again, and again for ordination, for inclusion, for performing weddings, until 2014, when the PCUSA moved to full inclusion in all aspects of church life. That may sound like a long time, but it really, in the scope of the church history, that's fairly short and brief. Other things that were going on, on a slightly personal note, my love life goes something like country music. I've been in 1960s. A divorced person like me could not be an elder. In the 1960s, my marriage, an interracial marriage, would not have been permitted either. So the church has moved in all those years to accept me, and has now moved on other issues regarding other people. So the progress has been slow, but definitely progress. All right. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Jim about the issues of the LGBTQ community here in St. Pete. Jim, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very excited to be here with COVID. We don't have these opportunities very often to reach communities in our city, and anytime we get an opportunity to do that, we're grateful for that. My name is Jim Nixon. I am the LGBTQ liaison for the mayor's office here in St. Pete. As Kyle mentioned, I have a dual role. I also manage Metro's LGBTQ Welcome Center. As far as LGBTQ liaison, I work as a employee of the city to work on inclusive policies that impact our community, both in the LGBTQ community and outside. Just in case anyone doesn't know, LGBTQ is lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, queer questioning individuals. The Gallup poll just released a statistic this morning that 5.6% of our American population is LGBTQ. We are definitely a large supported community here in St. Petersburg. In my role, my primary responsibilities is following the Human Rights Campaign Municipal Quality Index. It is a rating system on inclusivity within the policies of a city. They rate 502 cities throughout the country. For the last 7 years, St. Petersburg has scored a perfect score of 100 points. That is based on our policies of anti-discrimination, inclusion, policies that directly impact LGBTQ city employees, non-discriminatory practices, not just within the city, but also within our subcontractors and businesses that do business with the city. And so that is probably 50% of my role as liaison. The other is to work with area businesses to help support LGBTQ businesses, as well as make that connection between the community and our city leaders. As far as the responsibilities at the LGBTQ Welcome Center, we were the third Welcome Center that opened in 2014. We were the third in the nation. We are a center owned and operated by Metro Inclusive Health. We are a tourism destination that supplies information for tourists, people relocating to the area, as well as supply support for the LGBTQ community. We host social programs pre-COVID. Right now, we're doing everything like us now, doing it by Zoom. But outside or pre-COVID, we hosted our LGBTQ Youth Night, youth from the age of 13 to 17, on Friday and Saturday nights, giving them a safe space where they're around familiar individuals that's curated by Metro. We had anywhere from 20 to 30 youth per night. And for a lot of youth, that is the only place they were able to go and be in a safe space. So it's imperative that we reach out to that sector of our community. Primarily, my role focuses in need on really three areas in our community. We'll talk about some of the terms I mentioned, but typically youth, trans, and elders are three areas that are the in most need of service and in some extent protection. And so we focus on policies and opportunities the city can take to make sure that we are supporting those individuals within the LGBTQ community. I work with the mayor to file proclamations for the Trans Day of Remembrance and Trans Day of Visibility, which are two events important to the trans community. Trans individuals are one of the most subject to violent community within the LGBTQ community. Last year in the United States, 40 trans individuals were murdered in our country, and that has gone up every single year since they've been tracked by the Human Rights Campaign. So we have an event every year called Trans Day of Remembrance, where we recognize those individuals that suffered violence and those that have been murdered. Youth, because of the access to resources, are imperative. I work with agencies like Family Resource to supply emergency housing. Youth homelessness is higher in the LGBTQ community, so we focus in that area and make sure that we have support and services available to them. We also see a higher need for support and assistance in the elder community within the LGBTQ community. Primarily disconnections from family, lack of supportive children as LGBTQ elders age into assisted living or retirement. They may not have necessarily the services or the assistance that you would get from your children. But we also know that, especially in the gay men's community, there is a whole generation that we lost in the 80s due to AIDS. And that loss creates a gap that would be mentorship, that we would learn how to make that progression from working to retirement. And so we work with agencies like EPIC and EPIC Generations, Metro Inclusive Health, which is our SAGE affiliate. SAGE is a national advocacy group out of Washington, D.C. That works on LGBTQ elder issues. And we make sure that those services are available. We're working right now with the Rainbow Housing Coalition to work towards having LGBTQ assisted living training and housing here in the city of St. Petersburg, which will be a first for us. So that's sort of the roundabout of what I do and what my daily efforts are in working with the community. In the last 4 years, I've been very proud to have the first full policy for an anti-bullying policy through the city's youth-facing services. That includes sexual orientation and gender identity. We talk a lot about bullying, but without a policy that actually gives teeth to that policy. Whereas if you're youth bullying another youth, while it's important that we stop that and recognize the individual who's bullying and getting bullying, this policy actually makes it a responsibility to react to that if you witness bullying within our youth-facing services. We passed that in 2019. Last year, I worked on a project to paint 25th and Central in a progressive pride mural. Very proud of that, considering at a pivotal point, we wanted to recognize the Grand Central District as the birthplace of St. Pete Pride going into its 19th year, and at the same time recognize LGBTQ people of color, as well as the trans community. So you'll see 11 stripes in that intersection, both the rainbow as well as black and brown, and the trans colors, which are magenta, teal, and white. So we're very proud to have that as our project. This year is our last year with Mayor Kreisman as mayor of our great city. We're very proud of the relationship we've had with him in the LGBTQ community. Mayor Kreisman has been a long advocate for the LGBTQ community here in St. Pete, even as a city council member, as a House of Representative member. Mayor Kreisman was probably our first non-LGBTQ business member in the Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. He was also our first non-LGBTQ member that was our guest speaker on our annual dinner. He has long advocated for the community. He made steps in his first year in office. In 2014, he signed the Proclamation of Pride that put into place protections within the city of St. Petersburg that really put us forward. Having 3 LGBTQ city council members on city council has made a huge difference in the inclusion of our city. The efforts that we make to celebrate St. Pete Pride, which is the largest pride festival in the southeast of the United States. We had over 260,000 attendees in 2019. If you think about that for a moment, our city is a population of 270,000. And while the community is a large portion of that of LGBTQ, it is not a gay pride event. It is actually a city pride event. And we have participants from all walks of life that come down and celebrate and enjoy that feeling of pride and love. And it's a really amazing event. We did not get to have that this year. We look forward to having it next year, or this year, as we go forward. We haven't quite heard what Pride's going to do this year, so we're excited to see what their plan is. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. That's kind of what I do. There are things that we work on when policy comes through the city, and there is a question about inclusivity. Is it recognizing everyone, how it impacts communities that we may not consider? I get the opportunity to kind of look at that and think of how it might impact communities that we may not think of on a regular basis.
Well, Jim, I'd like to ask you to go back to a couple of things you talked about. The homeless youth, that need, is that, what makes that particularly important? I mean, is that common?
Sure. Well, I think a couple of things. One, we see that LGBTQ youth have a higher propensity for homelessness, predominantly for a couple of reasons. One is that process of coming out or not being accepted by your family. There is also, we see that there is abuse in the home or family model. So we know that statistically speaking, we see that. On a side note to that, we actually, the HUD organization every year does a time and point homeless count throughout all of Pinellas County. I've been participating with that in about the last 4 years. And for the last 2 years, we've actually surveyed our homeless community on whether or not they are LGBTQ and if they are trans. We are expecting a report this year will be the first one that will actually get to see those numbers here in Pinellas County specifically. But the other problem with LGBTQ homelessness is the fact that they don't necessarily have the resources, to find support as youth. School is impacted. but we also want to make sure that they are protected from becoming abuse victims, for people in the community. We know and we hear all the time about human trafficking, and we know that LGBTQ youth who are in vulnerable situations fall into that. So working with agencies like Family Resource, they actually have a shelter called Safe to Be Me. While it's not exclusive LGBTQ, it is inclusive, and they are welcome there and open.
Another thing you mentioned, the elder care. Um, is it that LGBTQ people simply don't have children,
Right.
or that they have children who've abandoned them?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both, and because we do see people that have living their authentic self later in life, when they've moved from the family dynamic. Kids graduate, they move out of the home, and then people that may not have felt comfortable living their authentic self, being either trans or LGBT or LGB, they they come out, and that process can be difficult. So it's a combination of different reasons that we see that, but there's also parallels with family. Whereas, a lot of times when people who may not have children depend on their siblings, or they're in a point of taking care of their parents, and their parents may not allow them to be there when they go through that process.
Another question I have is, as we're striving to understand this, the Q. Um, I have always heard the term queer as an insult,
Right.
um, but now it's not an insult.
Right. Yeah. What we've seen in, I think it's a generational issue, as we've seen with other minority communities. There are certain words that have always been used in a derogatory term. I too, growing up, queer was a derogatory term and a hurtful term. But what we've seen is the newer generation of LGBTQ youth have decided to take that term back, take the power away from it. Very similar to other words and terms used. The N word is one. So we've seen that in younger Generation X sects of our community that use that word. It also is used more in a fluid term as far as gender identity, because people will use queer as a general term so that we're not dictated by gender identity at some point. It's funny, I did a LGBTQ travel seminar about a year ago, and there was um, a panel of LGBTQ millennial travelers. And these are, what are they? Now I'm going to show my age. What are they? The trendsetters on social media. And they have moved away from the LGBTQ completely, and don't like that structure, and actually are just, they're just human. And so they just use that. They don't necessarily dictate LGBTQ, because it does separate out our community in a way. We have seen the use of the word queer to come back and be as a holistic overflow of everyone within that community. But it's a hard habit for me, or hard to break that, because as a child and being bullied, and I grew up in rural North Carolina, I was bullied and actually violently beat up on a regular basis and called a queer. So for me, that's kind of put into my brain. When I hear it, I'm like, oh, what? But I definitely understand the need and the passion to take that power away from that term.
We have a question in the chat. Where in St. Petersburg would someone go if they needed help? Is Metro the contact agency?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple. I guess it really depends on what help they need. But one of the roles that the LGBTQ Welcome Center does is it serves as a connection to all of those agencies. So if an LGBTQ individual is suffering from domestic abuse or homelessness, or if it's an LGBTQ youth, they can come to that central source. And I'm there 3 days a week, and my assistant, Robert, is there on Friday and Saturdays. We have the resources to be able to connect them to services. It's interesting. The Welcome Center is a beacon in our community. Just in its name, it is who we are as a community. It is the Welcome Center, and we are all inclusive. It is not just for LGBTQ people. We welcome everyone. We provide services to everyone, and it's a really great house. If you haven't seen, the Welcome Center was actually donated by the Mara Jean Hotel. It was part of the hotel. It was called the Haworth House, and they were going to tear it down. And in 2013, they donated it to Metro. We lifted the house up and moved it 2 blocks down the street to create the Welcome Center. But there are agencies specific. Metro Inclusive Health is an amazing organization. I've worked with them off and on for about 20 years. They started out in the 80s at a small office in King of Peace as a resource for HIV and AIDS during the AIDS crisis. They were a case management assistance program. They grew over the years to a community center, and over the last 6 years have really focused on inclusive health services. So while they still provide case management, they've moved into primary care, on-site testing, pharmacy. They focus on sexual health prevention to make sure that we're stopping the spread of HIV and STIs. They also work on issues that I work on with youth and the trans community.
And the Welcome Center is located on Central Avenue?
It is. It's in the Grand Central District. It's at 2227 Central Avenue. And of course, the Grand Central District has been a pivotal place for the LGBTQ community here. It was actually one of the first districts. You hear about our districts in the city, one of the first districts. And at the time that the Grand Central District had started here in St. Pete, out of 120 businesses, almost 82, I think it was 82, were LGBTQ owned. We have a very long-standing LGBTQ community here in St. Pete. While we've seen such inclusion and welcomeness in our city in the last 8 years, we've had Metro that's been around 27 years. We've had our LGBTQ Film Festival that's been around for 35 years. Our Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce has been around for 25 years. Watermark Newspaper, which is a gay and lesbian newspaper, has been around 25 years. So we've had a long-standing tight community that have been a source of support and help for each other. What we see now, and luckily it's a problem that we're glad to have, is that we're not necessarily required to live and work and spend our money in a gay business or a gay neighborhood. St. Pete is a gay neighborhood, I tell people all the time. We're welcome everywhere, and we welcome everyone. And so we're really proud of that. But yeah, the Grand Central District is one of those places. We have a few core neighborhoods, but it really is about all of St. Pete.
I see Megan has her hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Colin. It gets to the question that Gretchen put up in the chat as well. The acronym of LGBTQ has kind of expanded over the past, few years or so, and it's become LGBTQIA+. And I think one way for people to better understand the broad spectrum of gender identities, like Gretchen pointed out, is to understand what those terms mean. And I think when it comes to inclusion of the LGBTQ community, understanding those terms is really important, and especially in also understanding the difference between gender and sex as well. So if you could talk a little bit about the expanded acronym and the difference between gender and sex.
Yeah, there is a growing alphabet. I get on TikTok, which is not my age group, but I do love TikTok, and they call us the alphabet mafia because we have all these letters. I mentioned what LGBTQ plus or or what LGBTQ is. So there is the AI plus. There's also a few letters beyond that. Typically with LGBTQ, and we mentioned those, we also have I and A, which is intersect and asexual. And then we actually have two-spirit, there's others. And then in the plus, and the community kind of talks a little different. Some people say that it's people who are just not really in any of those. It's also, I use it for allies. And I think an important part of what we see in our community is that the LGBTQ AI plus community gets nowhere without allies. And we see that in our administration, we see that in our city council, we see that in our local businesses and our business development. So, you know, it is an important part, and I never ever want to leave out that part of our community. So anyone can be an ally to the LGBTQ community just by being open to who we are, and that's an important part of that as well. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about sexuality and gender identity. The easiest terms that I've ever heard to use it is sexuality is who you wake up with, gender identity is who you wake up as. You know, I'm a gay man, and gender identity for me is I recognize as he, him, his. Pronouns, and I can talk a little bit about pronouns, but it's two separate issues of who you recognize yourself as for gender identity. We see the trans community structure a little bit beyond just the he or she, and then we see our non-gender, non-conforming individuals that recognize without a gender, and so they recognize as them, they, theirs. Pronouns is a way for the trans community to receive acceptance by giving your pronouns or by asking an individual their pronouns. And it's an easy way to be welcoming to the trans community, because as we've seen in the trans community, what our expectation of physical appearance may not apply to individuals of the trans community.
Gretchen, did that answer your question?
Yes, I just put in another question too. If maybe, Jim, you could talk a little bit about some you didn't mention, non-binary, transmasc, transfemme. There are so many other things. And I find when I'm talking to people who have no clue what I'm talking about, it's really difficult to make them understand. So I'm just looking for a little guidance here.
Yeah, so the trans, as an individual that works in the trans community, it is at times difficult for myself as well, because it is fluid. Whereas a lot of trans individuals, it does change as they may feel more masculine or they may feel more feminine. We try to move away from gender specifics like brothers and sisters and terminologies, because there are individuals who are non-gender, non-binary, meaning that they don't recognize as masculine or female or feminine. And so we move away from those terminologies. But the biggest and easiest thing I found in the trans community is an open question. If you announce your pronouns, they will typically announce theirs, and that will give you a good understanding of how to respond respectfully.
Megan, did you raise your hand again? No. Oh.
Sorry, just forgot to put it down.
Okay, for those of you, yes, we are using the chat for questions, or you can use the raise your hand icon at the bottom of your screen. But Jim, I'd like to ask you another question. As a church that wants to be inclusive, merely opening our door and saying we're inclusive might not be enough. As we reach out to people in the LGBTQ plus community, what do we need to know? I mean, the church has had a long history of oppression, and this turnaround is entirely recent. I would not be surprised to find skepticism on the part of the LGBTQ community about us.
Right. Yeah, I will tell you, I had not participated in your church until about 3 years ago when during the Pride Month, you hosted the Interpride Festival, which is an event every year for Pride that brings different denominations together and celebrating unity within the community, and brings all those churches together. So I think, we do have in our city very open and inclusive churches with King of Peace MCC. Allendale Methodist has, of course, also very open and welcoming for the LGBTQ community, um, and Unitarian Universalist. And even our non-religious churches like the Different Church and a few of those. Um, so there is history there that I think, collaborating and working with another church. Um, the marriage issue is always kind of predominant and um, upfront, is if churches are inclusive in doing same-sex weddings, which is the law of the land as far as the marriage equality is concerned. I know even Allendale Methodist Church has kind of broke from their doctrine to say they will, even though the Methodists do not uh, recognize same-sex marriage. So I think being involved in the community, we're a community that's very represented by imagery or by people being participatory. So if you have an opportunity during Pride to host a Pride event at your church, or to be visible in the community with a booth at the street festival, or working with agencies like Come Out St. Pete, the film festival, those are ways that the church can show they are open and inclusive. But I think doing these type of outreaches make a big difference as well, and having them available on YouTube so that people that may not be comfortable being here, you know, uh, have an opportunity to see the efforts that you're taking.
Thank you. Next question from the chat is LGBTQA plus discrimination a problem in the local public schools?
Well, I say that there has been problems. I would say in the last 3 years, we have not been approached with a problem. Pinellas County and St. Pete, both which were early in the process of putting together a human rights ordinance. St. Pete was the first to put their human rights ordinance in 2002, and the county adopted it, I think, 2 to 3 years later. And so what that did was it set a precedence as far as, discriminatory problems going forward. Now, with the school system changing from public school to voucher programs and private schools, we have seen problems where private schools may have a policy, and some of the religious-based schools, that they do not welcome or support LGBTQ individuals as teachers or students. And so there is concern, not necessarily here in Pinellas County, but in other areas where tax dollars are paid to school programs that discriminate against LGBTQ individuals. Um, Luckily, many schools in our areas have Gay Straight Alliance, which is a big effort to open up the potential for people to have access to connect with people that are LGBTQ in high schools and junior high, but also to individuals that support them. And that's a lot of times really what we look for and hope to see is the community that can come together, but come together with allies that support them. I think technology has made a huge difference in our schools and in our youth. They are in many ways very positive, in lots of ways not so positive, but they have access to more information. And so I think we see our youth have access to information. Now, whether they disseminate that information correctly and in a positive way is important. But even a place like the Welcome Center I mentioned earlier, we actually have therapists who work with LGBTQ youth who will just say, go to the Welcome Center. Don't do anything, just go in and look around. But that's an opportunity to know that you're not alone, and have an opportunity to be exposed to people that are who you are and in a safe space. And so that's kind of important. But we haven't had a problem here in Pinellas County that I know of.
Next question in from the chat. Do you have educational programs for parents, teachers, or interested others?
We do. There is a very large nonprofit that started not shortly after the Stonewall riots in 1969 called PFLAG, and it is parents of gays and lesbians. And they meet both in St. Pete and in Tampa. They meet at Metro in their community center. They do monthly meetings. I believe right now they're still doing Zoom meetings. And they are really there to help parents of LGBTQ individuals navigate that process of not just their children or their family members coming out, but also to be a more inclusive parent, to have an understanding. Because a lot of times, parents never have an exposure to LGBTQ individuals until their child comes out. And that is a very devastating event for a lot of parents. The hopes and dreams that you may have had, while they aren't gone, they're just different. And so PFLAG helps parents navigate that with both terminology, support, and you're typically there with other parents of gays and lesbians who can talk about the experience. And everyone's on a different timeline in that trajectory. So whereas parents who had children came out many, many years ago still go to PFLAG because of the great support they do. And out of that, it's funny, there's a group called Mom Hug, Free Mom Hugs. And they come to Pride and they come to LGBTQ events. And that came out of PFLAG, where these moms randomly, who even if they don't have children, come out and they support the LGBTQ community and they give free hugs, which is really a terrific thing to have for a lot of youth. A lot of LGBTQ people are disconnected from family, have been rejected, have been turned away, for any different set of reasons. So to have that family connection is really good, even if it's not direct families.
Okay, so Jim, if I'm in the community and moving to St. Pete and I come to the Welcome Center, what would I find there to help me move in?
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to do is give you a really nice package of information, because that's really what we want to make sure you don't away from. And in that, you're going to have a visitor's guide that is LGBTQ specific. It's a publication put out by Creative Looking called Tampa Gay. It is a guide of just information about the LGBTQ community. We're going to give you a relocation guide, which is put out by the St. Pete Chamber. And that actually has a featured article about the LGBTQ community here in St. Pete. We also have a piece that was published by the city's marketing on our LGBTQ community. So it carries information about the city and its economic development and different information. But one of the resources that we supply, and we do this also on our website, is information about our area. In St. Pete, we do have neighborhoods that are highly populated. We call them gayborhoods, but they are areas that we find more LGBTQ people live. Inwood, Old Northeast, Gulfport. So we give out neighborhood information. We work with local realtors to provide information about our community and to just supply information about the neighborhoods and what's close to. I tell people all the time, if downtown is the crown jewel of St. Pete, Central Avenue is the spine of the city. And it talks about the district's information. So to have that information to give out. One of the other things we have at the Welcome Center, we are a self-profit nonprofit. The only money that we generate out of the Welcome Center is through our membership program. So we are a member-supported center. Individuals, families, small business, nonprofits and corporate members can support the center by being members. And in turn, we give them exclusive marketing at the center. So we have a lot of businesses that support the center financially. And in turn, we can actually help people facilitate a list of realtors. We can help them find chiropractors, doctors, behavioral health and therapy, bars, restaurants. We even have a kayak company who's a member and support. So there's a lot of opportunities, and we list all of those on our website. It's lgbtqwelcomecenter.org is the website. I can put that in the chat when we finish. So we have those resources. But one of the other things that we have is we, being the art city, and arts is predominant throughout our city, we actually support LGBTQ artists and makers. We have a boutique that has merchandise available to sale. It's on consignment. All the artists are promoted. They receive 60% of the sale. The Welcome Center maintains 38% less credit card fee. And so we have exclusive LGBTQ art and artists that are very popular in our area, from Chaz Mize, John Gascott, Andrea Paulitz. We have jewelry makers. We have an artist that makes wine glass topiaries. And t-shirts sell really, really well. So candle makers, we have quite a bit of arts and crafts that are there for sale. Before COVID, we were also an ice cream cobbler, and that was very, very popular. If I could retire and be an ice cream scoop salesperson, I'd be good. But with COVID, we had to take that out. So we always had great times when people would come in. It's a great place to hang out. We offer free Wi-Fi. They come in, get ice cream or coffee, and sit out front, listen to music. So it's really that safe, welcoming space. We remodeled the house in 2014. It's a 1920s bungalow with that craftsman architecture throughout the house. And we went and got a 1920s paint chart and painted the house back to its original color, which is a very soft, welcoming yellow. And people will walk in the house and they're just amazed how beautiful the house is, how comfortable it is, and how welcoming.
I see Dick and Sandy have a question.
Jim, this is Dick Avert. I have a question, just for my information. I see after your name on the screen here that you have 4 what I would call masculine pronouns: he, him, his. What should that convey to me?
Yeah, so what that is it's basically an opportunity for me to announce my pronouns, regardless of having that conversation. So I recognize as he, him, his as a masculine pronoun, whereas a trans individual, because our appearance doesn't always match how we recognize on our gender expression, it tells what they recognize, so that what you may perceive without that information is what they're conveying. So whereas if you were a trans woman, you would have she, her, hers. And if you were non-binary or you would have them, theirs. So that's where we were talking a little bit earlier about pronouns. What that opportunity does is it just announces my pronouns without having that conversation in a group chat. And I would also say that it is about visibility and acceptance. So by announcing my pronouns, by showing them, it lets a trans individual know that I'm a safe person, typically to not fear going into a conversation, or approachable in that. So I hear trans people all the time say pronouns is probably the #1 thing to make me know that you're a safe person, that you're not going to react negatively to my being trans. And so that opens that dialogue.
Very helpful.
I'll continue with just saying, in a recent communication with a young woman who's an attorney, she wrote her name and then she wrote she, her, hers.
Mm-hmm.
What should that convey to me?
Right, that would convey to you that she recognizes as a feminine gender expression. But it also, like I said, while she may not be transgender, but she probably utilizes that to let people know that she is a safe person, that she is accepting of the trans community, and that is an open dialogue.
Okay.
Very helpful.
Yeah, we've seen, it's one of the things, I know even members of our cabinet in St. Pete list their pronouns. It's for the trans community, a lot of times, it is about visibility. It is about having a place at the table that people, may expect them not to be visible and out. And believe it or not, trans people are in your everyday life now. You may not know, or you may know. But what you can do is be acceptance and open to that. And trust me, there's times I make mistakes when it comes to pronouns. I'm a Southern kid, I grew up and I say, hey guys, all the time. There are certain things that we just are conscious about. But what the dialogue does when talking about pronouns is it takes those things and they put the kind of in your brain to say, well, maybe that doesn't fit necessarily, or that may be a gender expression. Like we talk about the trans community and our siblings, our trans siblings. We don't necessarily talk about our trans brothers and sisters because there are individuals in the trans community that are non-binary, that are non-gender specific. So we don't want to label that in a way. One of the great things that Metro Inclusive Health does is they actually have a diversity and inclusion training that includes all the information about the LGBTQI plus community. They do that in a corporate setting, but they also do it in a community setting when there's enough need to do that. So it's funny, it's lighthearted. There's no pressure when they do their diversity and inclusion training. It's really great. We actually do it with agencies throughout the city management. We do it with the St. Pete Police Department. One of the things I do want to mention, while I am the municipality's LGBTQ liaison for the mayor's office, we also have my cohort, Lieutenant Marcus Hughes. He is the LGBTQ liaison for the St. Petersburg Police Department. And he facilitates inclusive training for our police and first responders throughout the city. And it is ever so important as we get, when we have issues with our police department, to make sure that they are trained on how to address issues with trans individuals or LGBTQ domestic issues that they may not be comfortable with, or going into that situation ahead of time. And those are the things that really make a difference in our city, that we take that extra step.
All right. Well, Jim, thank you so much. I see in our chat, that's absolutely right. We would certainly like to extend you an invitation to join us on a Sunday morning as soon as we can get back together.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful, beautiful church.
Certainly appreciate the time you spent to tell us about your work with the city and with the people of the city.
And this goes beyond, invite goes beyond this. Like I said, I'm at the Welcome Center. That partnership, I actually moved my office from City Hall to the Welcome Center to run and to keep that option open. So if you come to the Welcome Center Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, I'm going to be there. And then Robert, who is my assistant, he works on Fridays and Saturdays. Oh, trust me, we love to talk, as you can see. You're welcome to come by and visit. We still have call with coffee, but no ice cream.
Oh, no ice cream?
No, not right now.
Oh, well, folks, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'd like to bring up next week's program will be on parolees and reintroduction to society for felons. So please join us next week. All right, and now is the time I believe we will close in prayer. Megan, shall you or shall
I can, or I would love for you to as well, Kyle.
I? All right, I'll give the pastor a break tonight. Lord, we come to you with open minds and open hearts. We want to hear your word to us in today's community and the world we live in as we strive to be the church of today. Thank you for Jim and his mission and the improvements that he's making in people's lives. And help us to be a good partner and a welcoming community of faith for the people he serves. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I do recommend you all go to the Welcome Center. I've been there. I wandered in and met Jim, and so it's a very beautiful building right on Central Avenue. So, and I got one of those awesome welcome packets that he was talking about. So, definitely recommend you walking in there.
Yeah, we've been there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were there for the grand opening. And it's a very welcoming place.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And good night.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Jim.
Bye.